The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome back to Harrogate once again. Now over the next 2 weekends we're going to be doing a bit of gap filling. You may have noticed there's a few holes on the eastern side of the district. Well, there won't be when we've finished with these. Welcome to a village which has a really tall maypole. Reputedly it's one of the tallest in the country. This is NUN MONKTON. NUN MONKTON, nunnery on a monk's farm. For the next 2 weekends on TVI, we'll be in Harrogate filling in a series of gaps that remain on the eastern side of the map. There are 4, and we're going to tick them off one by one between now and next Sunday, working our way from east to west. First on the agenda is NUN MONKTON. This is situated 8 miles northwest of York and is the village where the River Nid flows into the River Ouse. Surrounded as it is by water then, it's no surprise there was a major settlement here from the earliest times. It was the perfect place for a religious site. The name NUN MONKTON gives that away. The Ouse is navigable for another 19 miles upstream from here, and so river traffic played an important part in village life here until the middle of the 20th century. There used to be a ferry that crossed the river to More Monkton at one time, but that's now gone. 90% of the cottages and houses here are grouped around a village green which runs to some 81,000 square metres, making it one of the largest greens in Yorkshire. It has a duck pond and a maypole, which are lovely features, and sheep can often be seen grazing on it. One corner of the village harbours an amazing secret. If anyone out there has ever been to Snowdonia in Wales, you might have scaled Snowdon itself by using a light railway. Here in NUN MONKTON, the engine that ran on that railway is being brought back to life. Let's get going. This is how NUN MONKTON looked in 1900, and you would do pretty well to notice any massive differences between this and what it looks like now. However, one big change is the area of land which the parish covers. These days, NUN MONKTON covers the hamlet of Widdington to the north. That wasn't always the case. Widdington was its own parish in these days, but it was abolished and merged into NUN MONKTON in the mid-20th century. I couldn't fit Widdington on this map, but trust me, it's there, just off the map at the top. Some sort of settlement has existed here since the earliest recorded times. The name Monkton is a big clue. It reflects a pre-Viking or Anglian settlement, which was perhaps founded in the 8th or 9th centuries. The Domesday Book is where we find its first mention. Like most villages in northern Yorkshire at that time, it was referred to as a vastatus, meaning it was deliberately wrecked by the invading Normans to prevent uprisings against them. Well, it's definitely not a wreck anymore. Let's run through some of what NUN MONKTON possessed at this time. A lot of these buildings are still standing, and some are still in use too. One building that has changed is this school. There is still one there, but the one shown here is the old one. The new one was built just after the time of this map. The church is still there in the east, surrounded by the huge Priory Hall estate where the local squire lived. The confluence of the River Nid and River Ouse is nearby, and that too remains the same. You can see there's a ferry marked there. The ferry stopped just after World War II, but here it was still very much active. Along the southern edge of the green, clearly marked, are 2 chapels. Those are still there, but neither are in use as religious buildings now. They've had a plethora of uses since though. Not shown here is a pub, but it was definitely there at this time. This circle, by the way, is a maypole. So, as you can see here, NUN MONKTON is virtually unchanged since 1900. It still has the same discernible green and the same layout, with most of the houses lining the green's edges. The Priory Hall estate hasn't changed either, still occupying most of the village's eastern reaches. The route around this one will be really simple. Effectively, all we're going to do is walk around the edge of the green, because 90% of the village still sits on it. We'll start in the northwest, firstly tackling the school, before passing the duck pond to the Priory Hall estate. There we'll take a look at the church and the ferry landing before turning back on ourselves to find the Alice Hawthorne pub. From there we have the chapels and the Maypole to see, before at the southwestern end of the green going to find a really interesting house. Let's do it! But before we can, we need to drive into NUN MONKTON from the small hamlet of Widdington. This is to the north of NUN MONKTON, and it was historically a township in the ancient parish of Little Ousburn. It became a separate parish in 1866 before being absorbed into NUN MONKTON in 1988. Not a lot is known about Widdington, but the old OS maps do reveal some clues. There are three main features: a manor house, Widdington Hall, and a deserted manorial site. The latter was the predecessor to the two other buildings I've just mentioned. That manorial site contained the original Widdington Hall and the original manor house, both of which have been rebuilt. It's not clear how much remains of them these days, because modern farming has destroyed a lot of earthworks. And farming, by the way, is mostly what Widdington is about. It's leafy in places up here. Some ancient woodland that's shown on old OS maps has disappeared now though, cleared in favour of more arable farmland. Widdington is linked by way of a farm track to Thorpe Underwoods, but it's not the sort of road you want to be driving on. Most of NUN MONKTON's landmarks are based around the huge green. Overlooking the green at the western end of the village is this school. There's been a school in NUN MONKTON since the early 18th century, when the Dorothy Wilson Trust was set up in York to endow education in this village. The current school building is much later than that. It dates from 1905 and was built on the playground of the old charity school. It was built by Messrs Birch of York, and whilst it was being constructed, lessons took place in the old Wesleyan chapel on the other side of the green. Even though it's been operational continually since 1905, it's had a fair old fight to remain open. In the 1990s, when other local villages were losing their primary schools, the NUN MONKTON community fought hard to preserve theirs. This school currently has foundation status. To the green itself next, and you certainly can't miss this. Most of the population of NUN MONKTON live around this, a number that consists largely of commuters travelling daily to York, Harrogate and Leeds. There are a few retired people here as well though. The last shop in the village closed in 1986, leaving NUN MONKTON with relatively little to sustain itself. The green, though, remains a living, breathing thing. It continues to be grazed by cows, sheep and other animals, which is rare these days. As such, this is one of the last working greens in Yorkshire. The green has for centuries been a source of pleasure and the scene of entertainment. It was on here where villagers would hold occasional feast days or church festivals, when sports like wrestling and archery were commonplace, along with dancing. A lot of those traditions, though, have now gone. Until the first half of the 19th century, NUN MONKTON's villagers annually performed a ceremony called Rising Peter. It involved digging up, parading and reburying a statue that was supposed to represent St. Peter. The custom, though, was stopped by a vicar who regarded it as a pagan survival. The effigy of St. Peter, which was rudely carved in wood and clothed in a fantastic fashion, was placed in a box. It was taken to an inn where it was kept until the following Saturday, when another procession formed and the statue was reinterred. This was called Burying Peter. The ceremonies required a lot of food for the people attending them. Young men would go through the village with large baskets collecting tarts and cheesecakes and eggs for mulled ale. Afterwards, dancing, sports and suppers took place in the village every day while the feast lasted. I don't think on camera it really hammers home how big this green is. It's massive. You stand on one side of it, you can barely see the other side. And the amazing thing is, when I was walking down from the start point, I was sharing the road with cattle, because they do roam this green and graze on it. It's absolutely amazing to see. You don't see it everywhere, let me tell you that. Right, okay, so we're going to head towards the end of the green here in that sort of direction, because we're heading towards the church and the Priory estate. Though Nun Monkton village remained a single estate until the 1930s, it changed hands several times after the Reformation. Its first owner was John Neville, the 3rd Baron Latimer and the 2nd husband of Catherine Parr, the last wife of Henry VIII. During the late 17th century and the first half of the 18th, it was all owned by the Paler family. In 1748, the estate passed to William Tufnell Joliffe upon the death of his uncle Nathaniel Paler. These are all important names to Nun Monkton. The church has several monuments mentioning them. In the 1840s, a regular visitor to the village would have been the novelist Anne Bronte and her brother Branwell. During her time as a governess to the Robinson family at Thorpe Green Hall, Bronte taught the children of Nun Monkton's rector. So to 1860, when the Durham-born Isaac Crawhall arrived on the scene. He bought Nun Monkton from the Tufnells, and his family owned the estate until it was bought by the Whitworth family in the 1920s. Crawhall was responsible for the redesigning of the church, among other things here. The largest secular building in Nun Monkton, and architecturally by far the finest after the church, is the Hall or Manor House, formerly known as the Priory. It was once used as a location in the TV series A Touch of Frost, in an episode entitled Endangered Species. Now, most of the Priory Hall estate is off limits to us, but there is a public footpath that runs through part of it, allowing access to the church and to the ferry landing on the River Ouse. Let's head towards both of those next. St Peter might be the patron saint of Nun Monkton, hence the ceremonies that once took place on the green, but the church here is instead dedicated to St Mary. This is the sole surviving structure from a former priory and of considerable interest for students of Anglo-Norman architecture. The church is built of limestone and consists of a nave and a chancel which are combined into one. To the north is a vestry, which was added in 1873. The western end has a large round-headed doorway surrounded by niches, one of which contains a weathered statue of the Virgin Mary. At the Reformation, the eastern end of the church was demolished, and until the 1870s, St Mary's was a truncated, low-roofed building with standard 18th century Anglican fittings such as box pews and monuments. In the 1870s, however, that all changed thanks to Isaac Crawhall. As a result of the Tractarian movement, Crawhall commissioned a new East End built in a high Anglican style. Most impressive is the magnificent east window with glass by Edward Burne-Jones and William Morris, which has a claim to be the best stained glass in all of North and West Yorkshire. A local tradition states that some victims of the Battle of Marston Moor are buried in this churchyard, but not everybody believes that. Because of its proximity to the battlefield, Nun Monkton must have been directly affected by the conflict, but these claims only originated in the late 20th century. Huge church, this, people. You stand in this and you look up to the ceiling and you've got to be careful not to hurt your neck. It's a long way up there. Mind you, this was a priory church, and so they were cavernous things. It actually makes a bit of sense when you think about it. Beautiful though, lovely church, fantastic. Bit dark, there's not much light in here. Now, as we saw on the map, this church is the only remaining part of a former priory. Here's a bit about that. Nun Monkton Priory was founded in 1172 by Yvetta of the Arches. This church was constructed soon after that date. The priory was dissolved in 1536, and the other buildings have since disappeared. The dissolution by Henry VIII was carried out despite a desperate plea from his second wife, Anne Boleyn, that it should be spared. Records suggest that some of the nuns returned to their families, still under monastic vows of celibacy. They endured considerable hardship as a result of the closure. There is a theory that a hermitage or some sort of small monastic settlement may have existed at Nun Monkton during the Anglian period, long before the Priory was ever built. This would make a little bit of sense because it would explain the Monkton part of the village's name. The Nun part is obvious. The arrival of the nuns saw to that. Nun was added to the name in order to distinguish it from More Monkton over the river. The village stood on the important ford route from York, with More Monkton to the south and Benningborough and Shipton to the north. Getting over the River Ouse and the River Nid wasn't always something that people did by fording them. It was the only way to do it in the early monastic times maybe, but soon there was a ferry service that did the job instead. The Nun Monkton Ferry was extremely important. Let's see where it was. Cast your mind back to the Benningborough episode in Hambleton and you might remember we mentioned the Nun Monkton Ferry there. There always used to be a ferry here, carrying villagers and farm labourers across the water, linking Benningborough Hall with the Priory Hall estate on this side of the river. Photographs often do the rounds online showing the old wooden-built ferry in operation in the early years of the last century. One of the last ferrymen, George Wright, worked from a hut close to an old water tower on the Nun Monkton side. Villagers wanting to cross would ring a loud bell to alert him. The last ferry ran in 1952. Since then, for the best part of 70 years, communities on the two sides of the river have been cut off from each other. Close as they are as the crow flies, the only way from Nun Monkton to Newton-on-Ouse or Benningborough is a long drive around now through York. At least that's how it was until 2018, when the Harpin family invited villagers to a meeting in a barn behind the Alice Hawthorne pub. They pitched the idea of launching a new ferry. They themselves would pay for the boat and a new pontoon, but they would need volunteers to operate the boat itself. They had no idea what the response would be, but the reaction was hugely positive, and when the call went out for volunteers to run the ferry, hands shot up. Every weekend, therefore, from April to October, between 11 AM and 4 PM each Saturday and Sunday, you can cross the river here again. You do so on Bryan Ferry. Yes, that is actually what it's called. It's a wheelie boat, which isn't the biggest or the prettiest boat ever to sail the Ouse, but powered by an electric motor, it's quiet and light. Flat-bottomed and built of aluminium, it drifts across the water like a leaf. Well, clearly not everybody needs a boat to get across the Ouse and the Nid. There's a sandbank where the two rivers meet, and as you can see, there's a fisherman on there this morning. He must have waded across at a shallow point because I can't see any boats on there. Now, if he's not careful, he might find himself with an unexpected visitor if he stays here long enough. Here's the story of a ghost. There is a ghostly tale to tell here too, concerning a girl called Marion, a housekeeper to Squire Earl at Benningborough Hall. Marion was in an amorous relationship with a man called Richard from Nun Monkton. Their favourite meeting place was on the riverbank, by the old ferry. All was going well until Richard was seized by the press gang and carried off to serve as a sailor in the King's Navy. Marion was, understandably, broken-hearted. Since Squire Earl was away from home most of the time, the estate was left in the hands of a man named Laurie. He was jealous of Marion, and after the departure of Richard, he pestered her with his attentions, and of course, Marion didn't like that. In turn, Laurie didn't like her rebuff, and so, frustrated, he hired a notorious character to murder her, a thief and a highwayman named William Vasey. Vasey did his job, throwing her into the River Ouse. Her body was later found and buried in the churchyard in Newton-on-Ouse. Vasey was hanged for his crime after he was found out. Laurie was dismissed by Squire Earl, and later he shot himself. Marion's ghost supposedly haunts the riverbank now near the ferry landing, wringing her hands and moaning, sometimes screaming and calling for Richard. When Richard finally returned from the Navy and found Marion had been murdered, it's said that he drowned himself in the Ouse too. Back into the village, and now we come to the local pub. This is called the Alice Hawthorne. The peculiar name isn't that of a woman who once lived here. Instead, it's named after a horse. Alice Hawthorne was one of the greatest racehorses of all time, a dominant force in the 1840s. Alice Hawthorne was described as a fine animal, but singularly narrow and an awkward walker. According to local folklore, the horse was named after an actual girl who helped with her birth. A bay filly, her racing record is incredible, 50 wins from only 70 starts. Her debut was at York Racecourse in 1841, an underwhelming 4th place finish in the all-age stakes. Greatness was to come though. In 1842, Alice went on a 3-day winning streak at Chester, winning the Chester Cup, a handicap stakes race, and then the Cheshire Stakes the next day. 1843 saw her win 18 races out of 26, including the Doncaster Cup and the Innkeeper's Plate. In 1844, Alice started 24 races and won 20 of them, including the Goodwood Cup. Her final racing year was 1845, winning 3 out of 7. This was no ordinary racehorse. As far as the pub goes, this hasn't always been called the Alice Hawthorne. It was originally the Bluebell Inn. The building was constructed in the late 18th century as a house, and in 1781 it was first recorded as a pub. It was in the mid-19th century when it was renamed after Alice Hawthorne. The pub is the last of 4 which once served NUN MONKTON. In 2022 it was renovated by De Matos Ryan to provide a bar, restaurant and 4 bedrooms, with a further 8 bedrooms in outbuildings. Earlier in 2025, it was recognised by the Michelin Guide as one of the 10 best pubs in Yorkshire. The sun's coming out now, that's good. It's supposed to be a nice day today, so yeah, once that sun gets right up, the other episodes in this little run will look fantastic. There's one coming up next weekend, which definitely needs the sun to be up in the sky, as you'll see next weekend. But we're not quite finished with this weekend yet, of course. We still have the rest of NUN MONKTON to explore and a village to cover tomorrow as well. Now, in terms of what we've got left here in NUN MONKTON, there's a couple of buildings sort of in this kind of direction that are of note as far as I'm concerned, and there's also the Maypole to talk about as well. Moving on along the green, we pass the old Methodist chapels, plural because there were 2. Methodism in NUN MONKTON goes back to at least 1810, when the first chapel was built in the village. It was replaced by a new one in 1899, literally next door, as we saw on the old map earlier. The old chapel served as a reading room for a while, as well as the school, albeit, as we know already, temporarily. It was later sold to Mrs. Rhodes and opened as a village store in March 1957. The new chapel fell out of use in the mid-20th century and was converted into a house in 1955. On the subject of chapels, you may recall the Green Hamerton episode when we talked about the Roman Catholic chapel there. It exists thanks to NUN MONKTON. In 1870, a Catholic chapel was built in this village by Canon Robert Thompson. It was small, but it could hold 150 people. NUN MONKTON was selected thanks to the fact that the ferry did a great job of linking the villages on both sides of the River Nid and the River Ouse. But when the ferry disappeared, NUN MONKTON became a backwater. In 1949, the chapel was shut and later demolished. There's one final thing to talk about on the green, the gigantic Maypole. NUN MONKTON has had a Maypole since at least the 1790s. Not much is known about that early one, but in 1878 it was replaced by a long pole of Norwegian pine erected by Isaac Crawhall. Even though Maypoles are only ever used in the springtime, constant work is needed to preserve them. NUN MONKTON was no exception to this rule. In the 1920s, the pole erected in 1878 had to be shortened and re-erected. A similar operation was carried out by the British Army in 1975. In 2004, Isaac Crawhall's 78-foot-high structure, which was striped green and white, finally snapped in a gale. This, the replacement, is 88 feet tall. That, reputedly, makes it the tallest in England. That claim can be disputed though, because unlike its predecessor, it's a 2-piece construction. And having walked round the whole green now and taken in everything on it and around it, you'd think that would be as far as NUN MONKTON goes. Haha, it's not. This village has another attraction which is currently under construction. Come with me and I'll show you where it is. Now, of course, we're in Yorkshire here, which is a long way from anything Welsh. However, there is a part of Wales which does have a connection to NUN MONKTON, none other than the Ffestiniog Railway. This is the Treehouse, number 1, New Lane. Here, a well-known railway locomotive is currently being reconstructed by David Wood. He's the chairman of a company called 1863 Mountaineer Locomotive Limited, named after the engine that once scaled the Welsh mountain Snowdon. The Ffestiniog Railway, something which I've had the honour of travelling on as a little boy, is in Snowdonia, North Wales. A major tourist attraction now, the railway originally was built for industrial purposes and engines were never part of its initial plan. It was designed to haul slate. Being a mountain railway, it was worked by gravity downhill, with horses used to haul the empty slate wagons uphill from Porthmadog to Blaenau Ffestiniog. By the late 1850s, it was clear that the line was reaching its carrying capacity. However, the production from the quarries was continuing to expand, so in order to increase capacity in 1860, the Slate Company's board began investigating the possibility of using narrow-gauge steam locomotives. In 1862, they placed an advert for one in the Locomotive magazine. They asked for manufacturers to supply them with an 060T locomotive. There were expressions of interest, but none were accepted. Charles Menzies Holland, the locomotive designer to the Ffestiniog Railway, would then approach George England, who lived near him in London. England agreed to bid for the contract, and in 1863 he proposed building 3 040TT locomotives, primarily to his own design. This bid was accepted. England's design was for locomotives that had a low centre of gravity and were extremely small to fit within the railway's restricted loading gauge. The first 2 engines were called Mountaineer and the Princess, and they arrived in July 1863. They were delivered without steam domes, despite the objection of George England. As a result, they suffered badly from priming. Domes were hastily fitted in Wales before the locomotives could run. But run they did. The first formal steam-hauled train on the Ffestiniog Railway ran on the 23rd of October 1863. There was a second pair of locomotives named the Prince and Palmerston, and they arrived in 1864. These were to the same basic design, but they had domes already fitted. The introduction of the locomotives was a great success, allowing the railway to handle the increasing slate traffic and its first formal passenger trains. So, what does all of this have to do with NUN MONKTON? Well, Mountaineer is being reconstructed in this village. Using original drawings and casting patterns supplied by the Ffestiniog Railway, David Wood's mission is to recreate it as near to the original specification as modern engineering standards will allow. Blending traditional and modern production techniques, Mountaineer will live again soon. Wood was inspired by the rebuilding of the Ffestiniog Railway's No. 6 locomotive Welsh Pony. Having seen an image of an original George England engine, he realised how Mountaineer's 3 classmates had been completely transformed out of all recognition from their earlier form. Mountaineer is a virtually unrecorded engine and has all but disappeared from history now. After contacting Mark Ashton, a renowned small locomotive builder located in Darlington, a rough idea of production costs was obtained. Wood then visited the modern Ffestiniog Railway himself. They very generously gave him access to the original drawings, and soon after that, Wood and Major Brian Smith formed the company, 1863 Mountaineer Locomotive Limited. Since then, both have worked hard to ensure the project components stay within the design parameters. The mission is essentially to establish the Mountaineer locomotive's rightful place in history, and this has attracted the attention of many narrow gauge and Ffestiniog Railway enthusiasts throughout Europe. Given their great support, they're referred to lovingly as the Mountaineers. So, just to prove to you before we finish that cattle do roam this green, there's a northern section of the green which is close to where we started, and it seems to be used as some kind of makeshift sports area. There's some football goals on it, and at the moment the groundsmen are currently mowing the grass. As you can see, there's a herd of cattle on there who are making sure that the pitch is in perfect playable condition. That has to be one of the most interesting little villages anywhere in North Yorkshire. It's not every day you find something like the Mountaineer. Add to that the Priory, the Maypole and the massive green, and you have something incredible in NUN MONKTON. More of the same tomorrow? Yes indeed. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.